Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian Proud. I am the peacemonger, and I'm absolutely delighted this morning to welcome on the show Professor Jiang Xueqin, who is incredibly well known for his massively popular Predictive History podcast, where he takes lessons from the past, from my history, and applies them forward to the future to make really kind of viral projections, which often prove to be correct. So I want to kind of stay on that theme for the purpose of today's discussion. And first to kick off, thank you, Professor Jiang, for joining us today.
Thanks, Ian, for inviting me.
So it seems clear to me, particularly now under the Trump administration, that the US is racing towards the end of its global hegemonic status, if you like, both in political terms, but also in economic terms. And at some point, over the next 1 or 2 decades, China will surpass the US as the leading global economic power. It has the rate of economic growth, it has the size of population. Asia, the 21st century is Asia's century. How do you see that the next kind of decade or so playing out in terms of that quite historic and seismic transition to sort of China as the leading global power?
Yeah, so the issue is that when empires decline and die, they do not so peacefully. Um, and so what we're seeing right now, as you say, is a decline of the American empire. But when an empire declines, it engages in certain counterproductive activities. So, for example, it engages in too many overseas military commitments. So what we're seeing, of course, was the Venezuela kidnapping of Maduro. Now we're seeing that a huge armada has assembled around Iran. It is possible that the Americans will strike Iran at any time, possibly today, tomorrow, but very quickly. Trump has talked about annexing Greenland and Canada. He's talked about blockading Cuba. He's talked about regime change in Colombia, in Mexico. So this is what an empire in decline looks like. It's very, very traumatic for the world and for America itself. On the domestic front, you see ruptures everywhere. So if you've been following the news about Minnesota, there's almost like a civil war going on where you have a heavy militarized opposition going on. You have the Minnesota local police who are being harassed by ICE agents. These off-duty police officers who are of color, Latino or Black, they're being stopped by ICE agents and being asked for their papers. And I think this is all very deliberate. It's to provoke them. Tim Walz, who is a governor of Minnesota, has deployed the National Guard to guard certain buildings. So you have three possible forces: the local police, the National Guard, and the ICE and Border Control, all in Minneapolis right now. And as you know, just yesterday, an American citizen who was 37 years old, named Alex Pretty, he is an ICU nurse. He was executed in cold blood. We can only call an execution based on the video evidence so far. I understand that the Trump administration said that the ICE agents were acting in self-defense. But if you just look at the videos, if you just look at eyewitness testimonies, he was a man who was disarmed and then he was shot in the back. And then the ICE agents start to round up eyewitnesses and confiscate their mobile phones. So it seems as though these ICE agents are, for whatever reason, they're trying to incite a civil war. And there's fear that it's possible that one ICE agent might be shot by a sniper at some point, which would allow Trump to declare the Insurrection Act. There's also possibility of a shutdown in Washington, D.C., where the government no longer functions. There's all this talk about the Epstein files and how the entire billionaire class in America is implicated in these Epstein files. So right now in America, it's really a powder keg. And this powder keg can go off at any moment. And there's talk of ICE being deployed to other cities as well throughout the nation. Again, Trump is just looking for any pretext right now to declare the Insurrection Act, which would allow him to delay the midterm elections. Yeah, it's a very, very dire situation for both Americans and for any citizen of the world right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I watched that horrific video of, I agree with you that it was an execution or certainly a murder. There's a case to make that it was a murder, but they fired nine shots at a man armed only with a camera who's being held on the ground by several burly men with bulletproof vests on and, sidearms. It is totally, unacceptable. And of course, the kind of sense that I have is that these images, I mean, that obviously they'll have impacts for US domestic politics, of course, but they'll be shocking to the wider world in terms of the US, as you say, playing this more muscular role, wanting to take over Greenland, threatening Canada, kidnapping Maduro, Armada, Iran. I mean, how is this playing in China? Do you think that what are the reactions to these quite bizarre and shocking and sad events?
Well, right now the entire world is just shocked by American hypocrisy. So recall that after New Year's, there was these protests in Iran, and Trump made a tweet says that we will protect these protesters. These protesters have a right to protest freely, and we, the Americans, we pride ourselves on democracy, on our freedom, our liberty, and we will protect these protesters. And then just recently, in a massive troll, the Ayatollah Khamenei on his social media account said that these protesters in Minnesota deserve the right to protest, and we will protect their right to protest. So what's happening is that the hypocrisy of the American empire has been exposed. Everyone understands that the American empire only believes in might is right. In fact, Mark Carney has said this as well at the World Economic Forum in a speech that received a standing ovation from the audience. So across the world, there's dismay, there's disgust at the brutality, at the mafia tactics of the American empire. I mean, the fact that and the Americans can just violate a nation's sovereignty and kidnap the president, and then not only that, but to hold him before, he was put in a van and he was paraded on the streets of New York. And now he's being tried, even though, according to national law, as the president of Venezuela, he does have immunity. And he's being charged with domestic American laws for for example, gun possession, which is just ridiculous. So this entire thing is a farce. And now, Trump is talking about annexing Greenland. I know that at the World Economic Forum that he sort of compromised with the Europeans, but I guarantee you, in a week or two, in a month or two, he's going to go back to threatening to annex Greenland. And it's possible he sends in some troops to annex Greenland. Just the pure mafia tactics of the American Empire, I think, has disgusted the entire world, including in China.
Yeah, I completely agree, particularly on the parading of Maduro through New York. I saw those scenes and I was shocked. It looked like something you might see in some 1970s, African, like Somalia, for example, after they captured the US troops after the kind of Black Hawk Down incident. It was quite bizarre to see that in the 21st century in the country that professes to be the world's kind of leading advocate of democracy and
Yeah,
so on. I mean, the sense I have, and not only in the US but also in the UK itself, actually, is that as as we decline in power, and of course the UK's decline in power has been more rapid, of course, than what's happening in the US, domestic politics becomes even more tumultuous. Like when Trump was elected for the second time, the MAGA movement seemed to be truly ascendant and unbeatable, domestically. And the same could be true of the Labour government, in the United Kingdom, although they followed the Conservative government that also had what seemingly unassailable, lead. Do you think, all these kind of shocking events, global events, are actually making domestic politics more turbulent, and that the MAGA movement may actually be a boom and bust phenomena quite quickly?
So I study history and I look at historical patterns. And I think that if you examine what's happening in the United States right now, it's clearly a civil war. It's being fought between the Democrats and the Republicans. I think behind these two parties lies different vested interests. So the Republicans are mainly the financial global elite, as represented by Wall Street, and that's the old power. And they came into power through Clinton and Obama. Then starting with Trump is the new money, the Silicon Valley elite, as exemplified by Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, JD Vance, and they want to create an AI surveillance state. So these are the two major factions funding out in America right now, and these citizens, unfortunately, are just pawns in a larger game, and that's why my great fear is that what's happening in Minnesota will escalate, will spread across the country, and it will engulf the nation, especially if Trump decides to take a third term, which I suspect he will. The great danger right now is that Trump is creating loyal bases among the military. Okay, so I think that Peter Hegseth and his reforms in the Pentagon, it's really to weed out people who are not loyal to Trump and create a army that is more loyal to Trump so that when he does take a third term, essentially when he launches a coup d'etat against the Constitution, he will have the muscle in order to enforce this. ICE is turning out to be his secret police to get Gestapo, and they're being very loyal. I mean, the fact that they shot an armed woman, Renee Good, and then now they shot another innocent American citizen means that they are increasingly violent and therefore more and more beholden to Trump, who is their warlord. So that's a great danger right now in America, where Trump could be the Julius Caesar of our age, which is what also Spengler predicted in his works. And I think that the trends are clear. I think that we're moving towards that direction. And I hate to say this, but given historical trends, it seems as though Trump will succeed. It seems that he will get his third term, and it seems that the military will be more and more loyal to him, especially as he seeks more and more victories overseas.
Yeah. I mean, this all sits in stark contrast to the Black Lives Matter movement back in, was it 2020? I think it's 2020, wasn't it? Just before
Yes,
COVID
yes, yes, that's right.
started. And I think the difference was that actually the widespread protests that took place were allowed to take place. I've had many criticisms of the Democrat Party, particularly in terms of their foreign policy, which I think was truly dreadful as it relates to as it relates to Europe. But at least in that context, people were allowed to express their anger about that murder of George Floyd. And of course, that anger spread across the world. I mean, that sits in massively stark contrast to today, where any outpouring of grief and emotion is violently suppressed. And if that happened in Iran, as you say, the Americans have caught out. It's, as you say, it's quite a remarkable double standard. But in
So
terms of that wider kind of global response to this, I mean, so far I have to say it's been relatively muted, unlike in 2020. But I do think it is going to make more countries, including actually in the West, gravitate towards China as a more reliable political partner. We've already seen that through BRICS, of course, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, what's happening through the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, I foresee that process of countries gravitating towards China is only going to accelerate. I mean, how do you view it?
absolutely. And I think that Mark Carney, his speech marked a turning point in this. So recall his speech. He said that, listen, before we had this rules-based international order, it was really a myth because most of the time the strong just did what they want, meaning the American empire just broke all these international norms, like, for example, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which broke international law. But the Western nations went along with it because they weren't hurt by it. But in the age of Donald Trump, clearly the American empire has devolved into a mafia state. And if the world is to thrive, if middle powers like the UK can, if they are to successfully, if they're to be successful in this new age, then these nations need to work together to build a real rules-based international order. And there's exactly one nation in the world that's strong and that has been strongly advocating for multilateralism, for international cooperation. That's China, right? So China has been vigorously trying to promote international trade that benefits everyone, especially developing countries like in Africa and in South America. And that's why they're so popular. When the United States goes in Africa and South America, it's usually to launch a coup d'etat or to lecture on human rights or to money launder. But when China goes in, it's to build roads, it's to build infrastructure, it's to build ports. And China has been promoting, as you know, the Shanghai Gold Exchange and the gold corridor. And the idea is the US dollar is America's exorbitant privilege, and they've abused it. The Americans are now $39 trillion in debt. People have lost count. And they constantly print money to fund like these silly wars overseas, to fund corruption in America. And the world is financing all this. And so what China is saying is like, let's put a new order based on gold, because that's a way to restrain financial corruption. And this gold won't be controlled by China. You will have your own, you'll be able to control your own gold in your own, vaults, but it'll be like the blockchain. I mean, it'll be an open ledger. And so everyone can see how much gold is in the system. And we'll use this system in order to finance projects that the world needs, like more infrastructure building, that will lead to productive trade. And that's the Chinese vision. And that's a vision that I think everyone can buy into. And Mark Carney says, look, the old order, it's dead. Look at the way Trump has behaved. And look, listen, if we don't change now, he's gonna come after us individually sooner or later. Okay, so it's now Greenland, then it's been Canada, then it's gonna be Europe. Eventually, we're all in a menu, right? He used the word menu sooner or later, and that's why it's important to be proactive in establishing new rules-based international order where everyone benefits. And BRICS seems to be right now to provide the best framework for this new rules-based international order.
Yeah, that's quite right. And if you look at, for example, Russia's international reserves, since the war started, they've massively increased. They're over 735 billion US dollars in value now. Of course, 300 billion of that was frozen after the war started. But all of the additional reserves that they've accumulated have been, I think, over 97% of the new reserve they've accumulated have been in gold, not in foreign currencies, which is fascinating because obviously the West can't steal their gold, unlike their sort of foreign currency reserves. And I guess for China, I mean that they don't want the exorbitant privilege, right? Because it would weaken their status as a global exporting and investing power, I should imagine.
Look, the exorbitant privilege has really hurt America, right? So think what the exorbitant privilege means. It means lack of discipline. Lack of discipline means it leads to corruption. It means it leads to an oligarchy. So right now, Washington, D.C. is no longer accountable to the people. It's just accountable to a few dozen oligarchs who control all the wealth in the world. So I'm sure during the New Year's, there's this island called St. Bart's, and like a few dozen billionaires converge on St. Bart's with their mega yachts to celebrate the New Year's. People like Miriam Adelson, Jeff Bezos, and apparently they were like 80% of the world's wealth. That's just absolutely ridiculous that a few dozen people can control 80% of the world's global wealth, and this can only lead to the decay, the corruption, and ultimately the demise of your society. So exorbitant privilege has led to corruption. It's led to inequality. It's led to complacency. This has not been good for America.
Yeah, it certainly isn't. And as 80% of the world's wealthiest hang out in St. Bart's, I mean, I sort of make a comparison with NATO. Which for money to weapons, which before the war in Ukraine started, accounted for 53% of global defense spending. And what Trump wants to do now would effectively push that up to almost 65% of global defense spending, would be in NATO if this 5% target, is achieved. I mean, that appears very clearly a sort of even though it's being couched in terms of Europe defending itself from Russia, which actually has absolutely no intention of invading Europe, no evidence. for that. I mean, it just feels like a backdoor attempt to cling to global domination through military means. I mean, how do you see it?
I see it differently. I think the Americans are extremely corrupt. And so, Trump just recently announced that he's going to increase the Pentagon budget from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. America already outspends everyone else in the world in military spending. No, there's no military in the world that can actually challenge the American military. So why is he spending this much money? Well, the answer is kickbacks to the military-industrial complex. Okay, so this money does not mean troops will be paid better. In fact, many American troops are actually on food stamps. It's just ridiculous. It does not mean a more effective fighting force. It means more corruption. It means more weapon systems that have no relevance in modern warfare. It means the Golden Dome, right? And this 5% NATO spending, it's really the vassalization of Europe, where now these European states, to please Trump, they have to like pay off these American military contractors like Raytheon and Boeing. That's the entire point of all this. It's not to start more wars. It's not to make NATO much more potent against Russia. It's just so that Trump's friends can continue to steal some more from the people. I'm sorry.
No, no need to apologize. I don't disagree. I've said for a long time that actually the only benefit of increased NATO defense spending in Europe is to fill the pockets of military industrial companies in the US, but also to a certain extent in Europe as well. Of
And
course. Go ahead.
sorry, I have to interrupt, but and this is why the war in Ukraine will not end. It's a huge money laundering operation. A million Ukrainians have died already. Putin has offered peace countless times. This war is over. But unfortunately, this is not about winning the war. It's not about defending Europe. It's not about countering Putin aggression. It's all about money laundering. That's all it is.
Yeah, well, certainly in Ukraine, given the revelations about corruption in the circle around Zelensky himself, golden toilets, and all the rest of it, and the complete unwillingness of European leaders to criticize that has been actually quite remarkable. And also the complete unwillingness of European leaders to criticize young men being beaten up and dragged off the streets and put into minibuses and sent to the front line against their will, totally not criticized by any Western politician at all, which has been quite shameless. So, yeah, I'm afraid I'm inclined to agree with you that there is just a big money laundering operation. Unfortunately, the ordinary working people, poor people in particular, because if you're poor, you're likely to be the one who's beaten up and bundled into the minibus. I mean, these are the people that suffer most, and these are the people that the leaders in Europe and in Washington don't care, frankly, a jot about. From my perspective. But in terms of the Europeans kind of clinging on to empire, I mean, I think in the UK, in terms of how we pivot increasingly towards much better relations, with China. One of the big breaks on that is the massive Sinophobia, in the United Kingdom. I mean, there's been a significant, small but significant Chinese expat community in the UK for decades, quite frankly, but the almost neo-colonial xenophobia still exists. And a good example of that is the painful resistance to letting the Chinese government build and invest millions and millions in this swanky new embassy site near the city of London. I mean, the mainstream media, politicians saying, well, this is going to be a site spying. By the way, every single embassy in the world of every country spies. I mean, that's what they do, amongst other things. Has been ridiculous. And Keir Starmer is going to Beijing, I think, next month. I genuinely think that he, even though he doesn't want to admit it publicly, recognizes that we need to develop a closer bond, with China, but he's operating within a British blob and trying to navigate that. I mean, this must be quite perplexing for people in Beijing getting mixed signals out of London. How do you see it?
Look, look. Ian, you're a diplomat, so you know this very well, okay? So there are exactly two nations in the world that have been aggressively spying on the Europeans. They are first and foremost America, Americans love to bug Angela Merkel's phone. The Edwin Snowden leaks revealed that the NSA was spying on Angela Merkel, and you can imagine every other European leader. Okay, and the other power, of course, is are the Israelis, the Mossad. Okay, so these are the two nations that have the best record of spying on the Europeans. Okay, and it's really well documented, and you have very little evidence of Chinese. So as you say, it's really perplexing for the Chinese how, okay, we have all these reports and documents that the Israelis, Netanyahu, is tried to bug Boris Johnson. He went into the restroom, and he tried to install bugs in the restroom. And what was he reprimanded? Was there a public spat? Did this cause a diplomatic uproar? No, nothing. I mean, no one mentioned it. Okay, so it's really perplexing why this happens. Why? Okay, there's so much evidence that the Israelis, the Americans are compromising the national interests of the British and the Europeans. There's very little evidence the Chinese are doing so. The Chinese are always in the spotlight. The Chinese are the greatest threat, even though there's really no proven evidence that the Chinese are actually threatening the British political system in any way.
Mhm. Like I say, I mean, having worked in the UK system, I know how much we spy, and I think to a greater or less extent, I think everybody does it. But you're right. I mean, people pick out China, but also, of course, Russia. Whenever they throw these without looking in the mirror, about what we do. And I think about the very famous defection, Soviet Union defection of Oleg Gordievsky in 1985, and he was actually discovered by the Soviets as being about to defect, basically because a Soviet agent in the CIA, snitched on him because the Americans were so jealous that the UK was getting really good Soviet intelligence that they started spying on us to find out who it was. And when they found out who it was, as a KGB agent inside of the CIA, then told the Soviet Union, and this guy had to flee for his life. Anyway, that's a slight aside, but I mean it makes absolute sense, for the UK to kind of move more closely to China. I generally think he's a pretty poor prime minister, but I think in this respect, Keir Starmer is trying to do the right thing. Whether he succeeds is another matter. The UK has a big trade debt. We import a lot of stuff, from China, but we hardly get any investment, basically because we block it all the time. If it's a nuclear power plant, if it's telephone networks, if it's anything like this, there'll be someone who says, "Well, we can't do that because the Chinese will be spying on us." It's quite bizarre. So I actually sort of welcome what he's trying to do there. But let's see if he bears fruit when he's in Beijing. I mean, the other empire is the EU itself, and if that can continue, I mean, I think it's headed for a catastrophe. Quite frankly, because it's become so centralized, and it's taking power away from individual kind of nation states, that they're starting to rebel. And that direction of travel at the moment only seems to be going one way, and that's towards the exit door. I mean, what's your kind of sense?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So I'll make a point that in Donald Trump's national security strategy, okay, he argues that multilateralism is dead. It's a lie, and multilateralism is just a pretext for the Europeans, the British, to free ride on American military power, on American generosity, basically. So he says in the future, America is going to put self-interest first, above everything else. Okay, and so America says this, and I think everyone should be doing this, right? China should be doing this. The UK should be doing this. Europe should be doing this. Okay, you should put national self-interest above everything else because that's the world we live in. Okay, the American empire, it's dying. America is trying to cling on to this empire, and now it's just devolved in this mafia empire where might makes right. And so every nation needs to act in its own best interest. And right now, as you say, the EU, it's a huge bureaucracy that's not capable of being innovative, that is not capable of being strategic. So it just continues to be what it is, and it's leading to disaster. right now, what the EU should be doing is trying to negotiate as quickly as possible an end to this war in Ukraine, because it is not helping anyone that this war continues. And the longer that this war continues, the more people will suffer. But instead, the EU is continuing this war in Ukraine because honestly, these are bureaucrats and they do not know what else to do. They don't want to lose face, they don't want to admit they're wrong, and they don't want to suffer the consequences for their mistakes. And so the EU right now has become its worst enemy. This bureaucracy is blinding these nations from making strategic long-term um, interests.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, I've said it also that that it's that fear of losing face um, that is holding Europe back, because it certainly isn't the money, because we're the economies of Europe going into decline, deindustrialization is happening, debt levels are growing, taxes are rising, and all and all those things. So unlike the US, we're not profiting. I mean, some companies are obviously profiting from the war in Ukraine, but Europe itself, ordinary working citizens of Europe, are not profiting from the war in Ukraine. So I think it's that kind of personal self-interest and ambition of politicians who don't want to step up and tell the voters that actually, sorry, we lied to you. We said that we could beat Russia, but actually we couldn't beat Russia, and we've got to stop. And it's that losing face. Is for me one of the biggest things. Frankly, holding it all back, quite frankly. But I mean, I think in any case, I mean, that emotional kind of restriction that European leaders are placing on themselves, as you say, making them unable to kind of make genuinely strategic choices in the national interest of the European member states. And the obvious strategic choice would be to buy cheap Russian energy. I mean, that is the simplest, because that would open all sorts of doors in terms of normalizing relations with Russia instead of buying
the
three times
Germans,
more
the
expensive US
Germans have
gas.
committed the Germans have committed economic suicide, right? They no longer buy cheap Russian energy, and now they're forced to buy American LNG at a 50% markup. That's just economic suicide. It's not in their best interest to play along with Americans.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It is absolutely economic, suicide, and standing back, and effectively being complicit in the silence when terrorist attacks happen on gas pipelines, to Germany was quite a shocking development. But also, I mean, they've shot themselves in the foot in other ways with their kind of green energy policies as well. Quite frankly. I mean, China is obviously the world leader in sort of renewable technologies, uh, but the German economy hasn't even put the basic underpinnings in place first before shutting off their nuclear power stations and actually initially reverting to coal. I mean, the Germans used to be the cleverest people in Europe, but now it would be hard to say that that was true. Quite frankly. So, I mean, increasingly Macron and actually even to a certain extent, talking about, as Keir Starmer is, he's not talking, but oh, hello, hello, hello. So a slight technical glitch there. Yeah, I was saying, I mean, even some of the European leaders are talking about the need to kind of properly engage, with China. But I think that xenophobia will still act as a drag on them being able to do so, and the choking bureaucracy of Brussels will continue to act as a choke on them being able to do so for some time to come. I see. I mean, that's just how politics in the West seems to work. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I mean, there's xenophobia and there's also Russophobia, and these two things are what drives a lot of policy in the EU. But the reality is that Trump is not leaving the Europeans much of a choice, right? I mean, he's continued to be aggressive with Greenland. He's going to continue to insult the Europeans. He's going to continue to side with Putin on many issues. So, I mean, either the Europeans smarten up right now and make this pivot, or Trump's going to force them to make the pivot in a year or two. It's their choice in the matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, yeah, Professor Yang, I mean, we get a lot of misinformation, disinformation in the UK and in other European countries, frankly, about South China Sea. What is China's kind of likely posture and approach on that over the next kind of 20, 30 years, do you think, in terms of, the troubled Taiwan issue?
So I think that China is very conservative with its foreign policy. And so what's happening in South China Sea, there is a lot of conflict, but it's caused by the fact that China is blockaded by the first island chain. And if America will ever choose to embargo China with the first island chain, then China will lose access to overseas markets, which is the like lifeblood of the Chinese economy. So China imports a third of its food from overseas. China imports three-quarters of its oil from overseas, and all that passes through the Strait of Malacca. So it's very easy for America to blockade China. So just for its long-term strategic best interest, China needs some military presence in the South China Sea. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that there will be a time when America has to retreat from Southeast Asia because it's in civil war or because it's bankrupt or for whatever reason. Okay, which means that Japan will most likely become the dominant naval power in Southeast Asia. And China needs to prepare for the day when it has to confront Japan militarily in the South China Sea. Look, if you just look at the history between these two countries, there's a lot of conflict. Okay, so I think that the Chinese are probably happy with America being the dominant hegemon in the South China Sea because the Americans believe in global trade. But the Japanese, I mean, it's a resource poor island, and so it needs to build resource colonies throughout Southeast Asia. It has this history of doing so. So Japan will be militarily aggressive. And so China needs to preempt this strategically. So I think these are the two factors driving a lot of China's South China Sea policy. And I think it's very, very conservative, and I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, looking forward, given the history of Japan China conflict, and on the basis that the US is going to weaken itself through its own actions, over the coming decades, do you think, stripped of that US umbrella, that the Japanese state would ever actually be in a position really to pose a credible challenge to China?
So Prime Minister Takeshi, like a month ago, said that Taiwan was a vital strategic interest for Japan. And this was very provocative. This was very controversial because for the longest time, it was basically like, let's pretend that Taiwan is both independent and a part of China. If you don't say anything, we won't say anything. Okay, so that was just a status quo for the longest time among the major powers in Southeast Asia. And for Takayachi to say that we will defend Taiwan if it were to be attacked, then that is a direct provocation towards China. And this relationship between Japan and China right now is extremely, extremely strained. And we can expect an escalation over the next few months. Now, if you just look at this from a game theory perspective, the issue of Japan right now is its aging crisis. And in 20 years' time, it's not going to have the economy, the population, and the political will to fight a war with China. And in 20 years' time, it's possible that China is so strong that it's able to reunify with Taiwan economically, in which case China is not in a position to blockade Japan, in which case Japan starves. So Japan's not thinking like, okay, well, can we take on China militarily? It's more like the clock is running out on us, and we need to act now. Okay, the Americans are about to leave Southeast Asia. China is on the rise. We need to seek decisive confrontation now or never. It has to be a 5-year time frame because in 20 years' time we'll be too old to fight a war. So I hate to say this, but that is a strategic calculation for the Japanese right now.
Yeah, that's actually incredibly insightful, given the the population cliff edge that Japan is facing. Well, on the flip side, I think Ch China is kind of pivoting more towards a kind of family natalist type of policy increasingly. Is that correct in my understanding of that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
So China appears to be pivoting more towards a more kind of family focused population sort of stabilization kind of policy, which Japan isn't. Is my understanding of that correct?
So the reality is that if you look at all the countries in the developed world, okay, except for Israel, there is a steep population decline. The fertility rate has gone way down. The Southeast Asian economies, China, Japan, South Korea, are among the lowest in the world. And there are distinct cultural factors at play. All these are extremely patriarchal societies in which women do not feel that they have much agency. These are extremely competitive societies where it is extremely expensive to educate your child. And these are extremely unequal societies in which winner takes all. Okay, and these are structural factors that is inherent in East Asian culture. And unless you change this culture, you're not going to increase the fertility rate. And so long term, these nations will face massive population declines. China has a huge population anyway, so it still has more breathing room. But South Korea could be extinct in 50 years' time. It is that serious.
You the big stink by when, sorry?
50 years' time.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
quite incredible. So in this massive reset, which seems to be going on right now, um, which I think is going to play out over the next kind of 20 to 30 years. I mean, do you? I mean, I think the American. I was talking to Warwick Powell about this, the other day. The Americans kind of view this transition in very Anglo-Saxon terms. They see it as a transition from one power to another power. But do you think that the Chinese conception is different? That it won't be as binary as that. That they will be, economically the biggest kind of global power within the next 20 years, but given their focus on multilateralism, they'll be more of a kind of convener on the world stage rather than a power that's trying to dominate. And I think that the difference in Asian and Anglo-Saxon kind of thinking on talking about this transition is quite sort of interesting. I mean, what do you think?
So, China, the Mandarin is 中国, which means Middle Kingdom. And the idea is that China is the center of the universe, and therefore China's not that interested in the periphery. If you look at Chinese history, China has not that been aggressive. When it is aggressive, it's because it's trying to secure its northern frontier against, the steppes people that continues to invade China. But for most of its history, China has stayed within its own borders. And China is first and foremost interested in trading with the rest of the world. That's why it's interested in BRICS. That's why it's interested in multilateralism. So if there is a new world order, then China believes that it has to be based on multilateralism. It has to be based on global trade. It has to be based on what they say as win-win cooperation, and that is the Chinese ethos. But you're right in that Westerners can't really understand this because Westerners have this Faustian mindset where, they believe that it is romantic to struggle and to achieve and to dominate. But the Chinese mindset is not very much, it's not at all like that. Chinese very much believe in reciprocity. Reciprocity, in fact, is the inherent value of Confucianism. It is the underlying value of Confucianism. Reciprocity, the golden rule, basically.
Yeah, and it's something I talk about in the context of Russia, a country I know well, having served there. That reciprocity is absolutely hardwired into kind of Russian statecraft, essentially because I mean, Russia is a fascinating melting pot of Asian and Western cultural influences. I think, which most people in Europe simply don't understand, quite frankly. But the reciprocity thing is absolutely central to that. If you hit Russia, they'll hit you back harder. If you hug Russia, they'll hug you closer.
Yep.
And then it's just such a simple concept that most people over here, I'm sad to say, cannot see. And I sense the same actually, with China. I mean, I've only been fortunate enough to visit visit the once, but I absolutely loved the people, and hope to visit again. But for now, Professor Jiang, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it. You got such smart and strategic, actually, insights, which are rooted in your historical studies, which I think makes you stand apart from most other people on the block. So thank you so very much, and thank the viewers for watching today. And if you enjoyed this, please do continue to like and subscribe in the cause of peace. Wishing you all very much peace wherever you are in the world. And once again, Professor Jiang, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ian.